So you've joined the league of would-be photographers and purchased a shiny new DSLR, but don't know how to use it yet? This tutorial will give you an understanding of how to use your camera, not how to shoot good pictures. That I'll leave up to you. Firstly, set your camera dial to M, i.e. manual, and never ever use auto ever again, ever. The second step is learning about the exposure triangle: aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. Aperture allows you to take those cool blurry background pictures. Its purpose actually allows you to determine how much of your picture is in focus. Your camera measures this using an F scale. If you up the F scale on your camera to f2.8 to f1.4, you would achieve results similar to the pictured chess piece of flower and bird, where f22 would focus everything, like the far right image. The green F numbers indicate basically your general shooting range. Tip: you'll need a special lens to get F numbers between 4 and 1.4. ISO. This creates artificial light when lighting is bad or a flash is inappropriate. The scale on your camera can be set as low as 100, doubling up until 6400 or even higher depending on the model of camera you have. But be warned, the ISO actually lessens the quality of the picture, as you can see in these examples, so try to keep it under 800. Another tip, you can set this to auto and simply concentrate on the other corners of the exposure triangle. Shutter speed. This allows you to capture movement. Your camera measures this in fractions of a second, from a super fast 1/8000th of a second to stop movement in its tracks to as slow as you want, allowing you to capture those majestic waterfalls or light trails. Here's another tip. If you need to shoot slower than 1/60th of a second, you'll need a tripod or to mount your camera somewhere. So that's the exposure triangle. Just remember, aperture determines how much is in focus, like those blurry or not blurry backgrounds. ISO creates light when there isn't much, and shutter speed captures movement. The triangle is forever rotating, meaning each one is as important as the other, and you don't necessarily start adjusting from aperture or from ISO or from shutter speed. So let's have a look at your camera screen to show you how you see the settings. They're on the LCD screen, here, here, and here. You can also see these settings inside your viewfinder. Now let's put learning into action. Get your camera, switch it on, and look at the top of it. This dial here is called the dial of possibilities, as it allows you to adjust the exposure triangle settings. Turning it by itself adjusts the shutter speed. Holding this AEL button whilst turning the dial adjusts the aperture. And pressing the ISO button, then turning the dial, adjusts the ISO. See? The possibilities are now endless. Now have a look at the LCD screen and have a play with the settings. You'll notice the numbers changing, but simply knowing the exposure triangle, what each setting is for, and how to adjust them is one thing. Knowing how to set them correctly is an equivalently long tutorial in itself. But hopefully summarizing the light meter will help you get the right light out of your shots. The light meter is the single most important part of photography, as it ties the exposure triangle together. Every camera has one, and they generally look like this. You'll see it on the LCD screen and in the eyepiece, and it should be the first and last thing you look at before hitting that shutter button. What does that mean? Well, if you look at it, it kind of looks like a small ruler, and its purpose is to measure the amount of light coming through the lens. The indicator constantly moves back and forth across the meter as you move the camera around and during your aperture, ISO, and shutter adjusting. The center of the light meter is called perfect exposure. Ooh, meaning the camera thinks that you have sufficient light coming through the lens to get a good picture. If the picture is underexposed, your picture will appear dark and you'll need to adjust your settings. If it's overexposed, it will appear too bright. Again, tweak your settings. Sometimes you'll need to over or underexpose a picture to get that perfect shot. Why? Because the camera's computer is nowhere near as efficient at processing light as the naked eye is. Your Sony light meter should be around here. Think of the light meter as a balanced scale. You're measuring light using the aperture, shutter, and ISO settings until it's centered. Practice makes almost perfect. So now that I've completely confused you, let's put it all together. Firstly, think of the type of picture you want to take, as this determines what corner of the exposure triangle you'll start adjusting first. For example, you want a blurry background, so start adjusting the aperture f scale first. Then work on the other two until you gain perfect exposure. Or if you're taking a photo of a sports game and you're wary of the player's fast movement, adjust the shutter speed first, then the other two settings. Or if lighting is an issue, amp up your ISO, then adjust the other two settings. Once you've balanced the light meter, snap the photo. You'll notice each setting stated darker or brighter on the exposure triangle. This is because all three settings determine how much light enter the camera, and all impact on how bright or dark your picture comes out. So if all the settings are set too low, then expect a bunch of dark or blacked out shots. Expect an adverse effect when all the settings are too high, i.e. a whited out shot. Lastly, if the first setting you adjust is quite high, then adjust your second one to be lowish, then your third to be a balance between the two. It's a constant juggling act, but once you find your settings and you're shooting in the same area, tweaking between shots becomes minimal. All I can say from here is good luck, and if you're confused, then welcome to the world of photography.